So Farmhands Nourish the Flathead, as Robin said, is a nonprofit based in the Flathead Valley. And we do lots of various food access programs for low-income community members to access local food. And in that, one of those pieces that we spend a lot of time at is the Whitefish Farmers Market, and our organizations become a partner in the organization of the market. And last year, Climate Smart Glacier Country, a nonprofit that Robin's also involved in, put on a conference about the state of plastic. And we asked 2 of our staff members to go, and we encouraged the market founder and coordinator, Rhonda Fitzgerald, to go to the event. And after that event, Rhonda, who's a big advocate in our community, was convinced that composting and zero waste market was the right way to go. So from there, we started planning. Okay. Figure out how to advance my slide. There we go. So when starting to consider how we were going to host a zero waste market, really the impetus to even beginning it was the fact that we have a commercial composter in our valley. And really, you know, if you are going to be a zero waste event, you need to be able to compost that waste. And so we were really lucky to have Alissa, LaChance, and Dirt Rich Compost in our community. You know, the second thing that was really important was the community buy-in. So making sure that it made sense to do it, the community in general. So in thinking about that, it was really important for us to get Rhonda on board, as she's been running the market for the last 17 years. And then creating a plan to make it happen, because, you know, there's work involved with zero waste. And as you can see the picture at the bottom, there's one of the market volunteers emptying the compost bins as the day or as the event went on. So at some points in time, we felt like we were the garbage collectors, but it was really because we knew it was for such a great cause, it felt really good to be doing so. But that was a really important piece of making sure it was successful. And then the next thing for setting the stage was really getting the vendors on board. The expectation was that they would actually have to change the way they did business, essentially. They had to buy new products to put their food items in. And as well, you know, they also had to modify how they did things. So oftentimes at a farmer's market, you know, it's grab and go. And so chip bags are quite common. So to really talk about like all the things that they had to modify to make it happen was pretty important. And understanding what all those things were so we could explain it well was important as well. So, you know, Robin talked about this toolkit, and as we've been creating it, all the lessons we've learned are in the kit. And then the other thing that would make it, that was really important, was to make it a requirement of vending at the event. We chose to start with the food vendors with all compostable products that went out of their trucks, because our market actually has quite a few food trucks and it's a pretty popular market. But the farmers really wanted to participate as well. So the biggest, I think, holdup to doing it with farmers is that it's pretty important for the freshness of their product, that it's in, that some products are in plastic bags. And we've been really, I guess, and Alissa can probably speak to this a little bit, but disappointed with the options for compostable bags that actually work well with produce. So the sacks that folks put their food into were all compostable, but some of the bags still were not. And then we're also working with our other vendors, our craft vendors that are part of the market as well, to eliminate single-use plastic with them as well. Did you have anything to add to that, Alissa?
Gosh, this is so weird. I cannot figure out how to be. Is my video even on right now? I don't know.
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay. Um, no, I mean, I think that's pretty much you've covered everything. As we go on, though, if I think of anything else that comes up, I'll say something.
Okay, great. So, the first thing that, so setting the stage was really what we were going to do beforehand. The next thing is, okay, how do we make it a reality? What do we really need to do? What are the first steps? So really it was securing Alissa to be a part of the program with us. So she has bins and signage and figuring out how to make sure that we had all the pieces in place. We worked with the vendors on resources and trying to figure out what products were going to be the best products for them to use and how we were going to go about it. Alissa has these bins, as you can see the picture here. So when we talked about the first steps, we had to make sure, so we have the bins here. Then we also, if you see behind that bin in the picture, there's a black bag with a sign on it over the existing garbage cans in the city. So, we didn't want to have garbage cans available, otherwise we would be sorting trash, and that was something we didn't want to do. And then we also had aluminum recycling right next to it. So when we talked about having all compostable products, it meant that we were not accepting any single-use plastic. And as we talked about, as I said in the slide earlier, that were things like water bottles, which you can imagine at a farmer's market, selling water is pretty popular in the summertime. So we eliminated all single-use plastic from drinks. We, as I said earlier, the chip bags, we didn't allow those. And so vendors had to, we're looking for resources. Alissa, do you have anything to add to that?
I guess that it would probably come at the end where we talk about some of the challenges that came from that specific setup. But yeah, I guess I would just say that coming from the composter's standpoint, that making sure that the containers that are purchased are BPI certified was really important for us. So that was part of making sure that the vendors were on board, and they did a great job with that. Gretchen and Rhonda and Brenna just worked really hard to make sure that they provided a really great available compostable containers that they could easily purchase. And I believe you guys did like a big wholesale purchase of compostable containers. So it made it cheaper for the vendors, and it was all kind of just laid out there for them. So it wasn't like they're having to do a ton of extra work to get them on board and to make it, we weren't making their jobs harder, was the hope for the vendors. Yeah.
So as Alissa said, making sure that it was easy for the vendors was the most important thing to making this successful. So we provided lots of resources for folks. And our original plan was to host an event with Eco Montana. Heidi Dribdahl owns this company that sources compostable products of so many shapes and sizes. And our hope pre-COVID was to get all the vendors together, and it was in March, to actually have a session with her so that we could, help everybody understand how actually easy it was going to be for them to shift over to compostable products. We weren't able to do that. So we spent a lot of time just giving them as many resources as possible. So we found that one of the local restaurant supply stores had compostable products that folks could purchase from Cisco, or their regular folks, places that they ordered from most likely had products that they could use. And then, for something more obscure, sometimes Amazon was the place to go. And they really were in all shapes and sizes, as you see, and hopefully you can see all the pictures in the video. On my screen, it's kind of wide, and we're blocking some of them. So if you need to move, you can move your view of people to the other side of your screen to see pictures better. But as you look at some of these products, some of them look like any plastic product that you would purchase. So, so there really was a wide variety of items that were available for vendors. We also later in the season found a plastic wrap that is based out of Australia. That's actually, it's called biotin. And we got the name of the gentleman who wraps in the US. And it became, the bakers then were able to wrap their products in that plastic, and that'll be required of all bakers in 2021.
Can I add something about the products?
Yeah, absolutely.
We did have a shaved ice vendor that is is basically, what's the term you would use?
Franchise.
A franchise of like a national shaved ice company. And because they are a franchise, in their contract, they needed to use the specific products sent to them from that shaved ice company. So they had to get special permission, and they had to do a bunch of extra work in order to be able to use compostable products instead of those branded products. But they did it. They went through the steps, and I think us being there to support them every step of the way through that, and like be supportive and willing to give them information about the why we were doing this was really helpful. And I just think that support from the event or the market or whatever it is, so that people are willing to go that extra mile to comply, is really important. And recognizing we had no idea that would even be an issue. We weren't thinking about little franchises like that. So recognizing that some people are going to have different complications and just being supportive for them to go and fix it.
Thank you, Brenna. That is a very good point. And the great thing is that particular vendor serves, the shave ice expectation is they're in a styrofoam cup with a huge plastic cradle around it. So just in that particular vendor, you can think of how much bad trash we diverted from the landfill, which is really exciting. And it was cool that, for us to learn that was a different thing that we had to keep in mind. I think the key to that was that we were talking to vendors about this in March, and the market didn't start this year because of COVID until June, but usually the end of May. So it gave them enough time to figure those kinds of things out. If you look at this slide, we're really talking about where did people really buy products from? And as you can see, the majority of the folks were able to purchase items locally, which I think was really helpful. And then the next best place was Amazon. All right. So the other piece, and as we've been working on our toolkit, we've been thinking about how do you manage the zero waste system. So our market in Whitefish started out with a pretty large construction project in the middle of the park in the summertime. And so we originally were thinking maybe we'd do a central station, how you see below, but it really wasn't possible the way the market was set up. So we had every single garbage can, most of the garbage cans in the park had what you see to the right there. They had the cover over the garbage can, they had a can recycling can, and then a compost can. So we had those in various locations throughout the park because of our issue. And so we had to walk around and monitor those areas pretty regularly. As you saw on that earlier slide, we were emptying bags and putting in new bags throughout the market during the busiest events of the summer. And we did this every week. So we also found out that it was really important, signage becomes a very important piece of education because the public, they're not great at reading signs. And so we wanted to make it as obvious and simple as possible. So we ended up actually getting new garbage cans for the aluminum recycling because the original ones we had a big opening in them. And suddenly we were getting all these compostable products in that garbage can. So we got new lids and cut a circle in them to make it really clear that you need to put cans in there. The other piece was that we put additional signs on top of Alissa's bins, just to be clear that all waste that came from vendors went into the compost bin. Because often people they'd have their trash and they'd see Zero Waste Market and they would get confused. They weren't sure what to do. We also find that no matter how many signs you have, you still have people that don't read it and get confused. So we would find compostable products on the side of the bin or on top of the garbage can. But we were monitoring them throughout the park as often as we could. And so we were able to kind of mitigate those issues. And then we'll talk about it a little later, but we would open up and see, oh, there's a plastic bottle from somewhere else. And I'd be doing my best to pull it out of the bins as the day went on. So that's one way to do it, is being throughout your event, depending on what it looks like, setting up clearly signed bins. But the other option, and I think the Bozeman Farmers Market does it this way, as you see below, is having a central waste area with staff and education. So as you see in these two photos, ideally you would have a tent that would be really clearly marked that that's where the compost and recycling was. And then you can have somebody there that explains to the public what you're doing, which I think is a really interesting and good option for events, because I like the idea that you're actively educating the community at large. We were more passively educating the community. And when we, saw somebody doing something that we didn't want them to do, it was an opportunity to educate, but I think it's better to be proactively educating. So initial hurdles for the market, aluminum foil. So the vendors in the beginning, when we explained to the vendors how we were going to do the market, we said compostable products or aluminum. And what we meant was aluminum drinks. But what they interpreted is that they could use aluminum as part of their food wraps. So having aluminum along with a compostable product doesn't work, and we found that out after the first market clearly, because the customer is not going to separate it out for us. And unfortunately, Alissa cannot compost aluminum. So we realized quickly that we couldn't use aluminum foil. And at first that was, I would say, the biggest pushback that we got from vendors, because they were unsure of how to, wrap their taco or wrap their burger. And so Alissa actually gave us a list of, good products that worked fine. She can compost wax paper. So we moved to wax paper within one market, to be honest, which was amazing, because the vendors already had, made quite a big switch in how they did things. And here we asked them to change it again one more time. And they did so within 1 week, and we were in a great position. We also found a source for aluminum water bottles. And I think we'll spend a lot more time this market. We'll see a lot more vendors in this market use those bottles, because our local beverage distributing place now stocks these bottles. So Montana Silver Springs is out of Phillipsburg, and they bottle water in aluminum cans, which is really exciting. And then signage, we really, as we talked about earlier, having clear signage was really important. We had asked the vendors to, help educate the customers at the farmers market, and they all had signs that said all the materials here are compostable, but they were so busy that it was really hard for them to educate people. So I think the more signage, the better. And then the other issue that we ran into was trash from folks that are, that didn't purchase something at the market. So they were downtown and they had a plastic cup from, the local coffee shop, and they needed some place to throw their trash, and we didn't have any trash containers in the park. And so they would throw items in our compost bins. Alissa, you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, all my trash bags. Yeah, I mean, given just that this was the first year doing what we were doing, and it was such a huge project to take on, it went really well. And there was definitely some issues. It was pretty funny to kind of get a feel of who was throwing that trash away. And frankly, I think a lot of it were in, and I have empathy for them and sympathy, even though I don't have kids, but they were parents, that had to change their kid's diaper at the event. And then they're like, there's no trash cans here. But there's the compost can. And just a lot of like kids' toy stuff. So I mean, it might make sense to have like a tiny, and we'll see what we do next year, but just have like a tiny, like literally, like a less than a 5-gallon bucket trash can at each spot that's clearly marked like trash. Yes, you can throw something that you brought in here, but it should only be like 1% of the material that's collected here. So this is going to represent what it should, physically what that would look like to contain it. But I mean, just owning this company, it's really, over the last 5.5 years, it's really clear that that's to be expected, especially in Montana when this is a relatively new thing, to be composting and to try and be striving for zero waste. So that's all just to say that it went really well, and there's, first year around, and year two, I imagine we'll have a little bit different setup, and it will be even better. And I guess I don't know where everybody on this call is from, but I know Missoula and Bozeman, I have friends that are composting in both those locations. And yeah, I don't know if we have time at the end to talk about to hear from people and why they're on, and just maybe some different, I guess, hurdles that maybe weren't there for us that are coming up for them in their specific location. And maybe we could have some ideas or insights based off of our experiences. I'm not sure, but yeah.
And I would just like to mention one of our hurdles in the what is not compostable is that one of our local coffee shops, Montana Coffee Traders, has a booth at the farmers market where they were required to have compostable cups. However, their building, their physical space downtown, which is only 2 blocks from the farmers market, was also selling beverages in non-compostable cups. And so people would walk from Montana Coffee Traders, the building, to our farmers market and see their booth. And the assumption was that all of those cups would be the same. So little things like that, where they look so similar and yet are different, is one of the reasons that things got confusing, number one, and also one of the reasons why we are pushing so hard and working so hard to make the city more zero waste friendly. Because if more of the town itself thinks in terms of zero waste, then our events will just get easier and easier to do that way as well.
So Alissa, you want to talk about some of the hurdles for you?
Sure. So this was a little bit different. Composting for this event was a little bit different than my usual, which is just doing, a scheduled weekly pickup for restaurants and residential consumers or residential clients. So pricing this event out was a little bit different and challenging because of being in Montana. We have to make sure that it's gone by the next day because of bear. We don't want to become a bear attractant, but at the same time, that's not generally when we take our dump truck out, and it would, drive another 8 miles to go do just that one pickup, and it's a cost. It's a barrier for us to provide that service at an affordable price for people in some of those situations. But we are able to work it out just because all of that material is so light. I could pick it up in, my truck. If it was food waste, it would be different. But I right now am pricing based off of gallons because that's gallons of material, which is just what I've done. Because I've never had to accept the amount of compostable containers that I am now, that's being asked from the community now. I might be shifting somehow to my pricing based off of tonnage, which would obviously be beneficial for people trying to put on events and they just have mostly containers. So pricing out individual events was a little bit tricky for me the first time around, but just for new composters jumping in and trying to figure this out. But it's just doing something like that a couple times and realizing what your true costs are, and being able to adjust from there. And that's all it really takes. Let's see, organic certification is not accepting product with compostable containers. So yeah, I mean, just speaking for the composters all around the state, we're in a weird place right now where, America is waking up to the importance of zero waste. And it's being pushed in a really big way, which is fantastic. And plastic is kind of being demonized because it should be. And there's a lot more people using compostable containers, and they need somewhere for it to be composted. If you look on most containers, it says must be composted in an industrial facility or something like that, which really just means the composter has to want to take it, number one. And number two, they have to do a thermal composting process, which just means that they're managing their composting piles or windrows in such a way that the temperature is getting really high, around 150 degrees. And that's going to break down that material. And especially with COVID right now, there's a huge demand for somewhere for all of these containers to go. So I am wanting, and I know other composting friends like in Bozeman and around the state are wanting to step up and be able to accept those, because we want to start, pushing for zero waste and getting rid of plastic. And we are coming up with an issue on the other side of things where we go to sell our compost that's finished. I have friends here in the valley that have an organic farm, and I wasn't even aware of this as the composter, and they were not aware of this as the farmer. I gave them they bought compost from us. We follow certified organic guidelines, besides the fact that we accept compostable containers. There's a synthetic binder and compostable containers that organic certifiers will not accept. So they will not certify me as organic product technically, because just purely based off of the idea that there's a synthetic component in the material that I'm composting. I did not know that beforehand, but they used our compost, had a great season, and then were checked out by their organic certifiers at the end of the season. And they're like, who's this? Do you know that they accept compostable containers? And they immediately took away their organic certification after years of having it and years of working towards it, which was heartbreaking for us, and it was heartbreaking for them. And it's problematic as the composter that's being, asked to accept those materials, which I want to be able to do for the community, and also be able to provide a product that's usable for our farmers and gardeners in the valley when there's that kind of holdup there, especially because, right now the research that I've done shows that if as long as a container, which we didn't really specify here, but I would suggest that the containers that you, I guess, usher your vendors towards using be BPI, B as in bad, P as in plastic, I as in intelligent, BPI certified. That means that they've been reviewed by a board and gone through a testing that ensures that that container, once it's broken down 100% into compost, does not leave any toxic residue. So yeah, so as long as that you're using a BPI certified compostable container, which is a lot of them, you can, Amazon, I would watch out for that. You know, there's going to be containers on Amazon that are, you know, maybe from China that are not BPI certified. And that means that that company cannot tell you for sure that there's no toxic residues left over after composting. But yeah, it's a little frustrating as the composter when studies have shown that there's no toxic residue left after those containers have been composted, and it's still not allowed to be used on organic farm fields. But that's definitely something to keep in mind. And if composters that you're working with, make sure that, you know, I've told all of my friends in Montana about this happening. They didn't know either, but make sure that they do know that when they go, if they are to accept those containers at this point in time, just the way that things are set up in our organic systems and certification, that not to distribute to organic farmers, because that could be problematic.
Thanks, Alissa. The other thing, and I learned this the hard way, or I think we at Farmhands learned this the hard way. We found that products that say biodegradable as well are oftentimes what biodegradable means. If it's a plastic product, is it turns into microplastic. And we had purchased some biodegradable bags for our one of our weekend backpack program, and found out that that actually it created microplastic. So as Alissa said, making sure that products are compostable and BPI certified are very important. So really what's next for us is creating a more comprehensive toolkit. We're in the process of doing that right now. We've partnered with Climate Smart Glacier Country, so an organization that nonprofit that works towards climate solutions, to create a toolkit for the city. We're currently working with the city on creating of them adopting a zero waste policy. And this is, you know, I think with any town can be really difficult. And so we've been making lots of suggestions about ways to go about events that would really encourage zero waste. And in doing a little research, we found out that big events, like here we have a Oktoberfest that runs over 2 weekends and is very, very popular, that they have to rent a dumpster from the waste, not the landfill, but the private waste company that the city uses to remove trash. And it's actually pretty expensive. And when we priced it out, it would be actually cheaper for them to go compostable and work with Alissa than to have their trash removed. The smaller events, that's not necessarily the case. And so we've suggested to the city that they charge a little bit more for folks who are not going to participate in zero waste, and less for folks that do. So it's our hope that the city will consider that. But the other thing, you know, in thinking about your town accepting a zero waste policy or protocol for events, one thing that we found, so I talked earlier about the founder of the farmers market, Rhonda, who's also a local business owner, has actually been charging ahead with the city considering adopting a zero waste policy. And she has been participating in a tourism committee that's talking about sustainability. And they keep talking about who's going to purchase our plastic. And Rhonda, in her wonderful way, said, why do we keep having this conversation about who's going to purchase our plastic? We need to go plastic free and we need to start composting. And she's been a champion of this. And so in telling you that, it's really beneficial if you have local businesses that are having these conversations and they're the ones also supporting a zero waste effort. Because if it's coming from just the composter, maybe they look like they're trying to promote their business, but there's no one in the business of composting to get rich, right, Alissa? It's a labor of love. And if the cities understood, you know, really where their heart is in it, they would understand that if they're encouraging cities to do it, it's best for the environment and best for the community. So having another champion alongside your composter, I think, is really. And then in thinking about creating a toolkit that would make it really easy for events, we've been working on a couple of projects. So we're hoping to purchase some compost bins. The city, all the trash cans in the city of Whitefish now are bear proof. And so our compost bins need to be bear proof. Alissa has some of those, but not probably enough for citywide events. So we're looking at the potential of purchasing 6 to 8 bear-proof composting bins that we can use for events. We're looking at creating branding and signage so that it's really easy. We can hand that toolkit will include a package of signs that can go to vendors that are on bins that explain what's going on and what zero waste is in a way that so the community gets used to coming to events and always seeing these same branded signs. And then it will, will become more of a second nature that's what we do for city events here. The other thing is we're working on creating vinyl covers for the city trash cans when we do these events, so that another, kind of branded piece that would be seen at, all events doing zero waste. And then, as we talked about the waste center earlier, we're looking at purchasing a tent that folks who wanted to use that model could use that would say on it zero waste event or whatever we decided to put on it. And then, we're also putting together a pretty comprehensive toolkit with, suggested wording to vendors and resources of where products are and all the lessons that we've learned so that their event can be as successful as possible. So before we end the presentation, I wanted to see if Alissa or Brenna had anything else to add. And then I thought, as Alissa suggested earlier, really we'd like to hear your questions and comments, and if anybody else, has done these kinds of events, things that you guys have learned, and we hope that we could have an interactive discussion before the end.
I have a couple things to add. Can I jump in?
Yes, please jump in, Robin.
Okay, the first one is just a confirmation or a question to Alissa that came through the chat box, which is, am I correct that you've found a workaround with the organic certification issue for your organic farmers? Like, do you have a separate windrow that's just that doesn't have compostables or something like that?
So yeah, I think Andrea Berry was the one that asked that question originally. So to clarify, I suggest always to use BPI certified because it means that that product has undergone pretty rigorous testing to make sure that it's not leaving any toxic residues behind in the soil after it's been composted. That said, no compostable containers are still allowed to be used in the composting process and still be certified organic. So that's the complaint right now, is that organic certifiers are it's making people angry because there's already evidence that if people are BPI certified using BPI certified containers, there's no toxic residue. Why aren't you allowing this on organic soils? So just to clarify that with Michelle, or sorry, not Michelle, Andrea. I have a friend named Michelle Berry. But so I have not decided what I'm going to do about that. It's challenging because all of our commercial customers are starting to switch to compostable to-go containers, which is great. You know, it's what we want to see, but it's really challenging for me to take 1,300 gallons of food waste that I drop at the end of the day and go through it and make sure that there's no compostable containers and that specific load that I'm going to put into my, you know, set aside organic windrow. It's challenging. There may be some ways that I could, you know, the future, if I get busy enough to just pick up from Costco that day and they don't put containers in their bins. It's just meat and leftover produce or something, you know. But as of now, all of the cups and used at restaurants that are compostable end up in their bins. So it's really just the grocery stores that don't have those cups in them that maybe I could find a way to make a certified organic product that could be used by, you know, Two Bear Farms and all these certified organic farms.
Robin, did you have something? Brenna or Alissa, did you have anything else to add before the end and we could just go to questions?
I was just thinking about like the outside. This is kind of just going back a little on the outside trash. One reason that I think that in the future we should shift to the central location is so that we can educate and so that we could have maybe one trash can, and if people, or we can gesture people to 1 block away the trash cans that are still available in the city. One nice thing about the location of the Whitefish Farmers Market is that it's a very small town, and the park where our farmers market is very, very close to the rest of downtown, where we are not covering the trash cans. So just like I think that it worked for us for our first year well enough to have those individual locations, but I think I'm really going to push for next year, and I think everyone kind of agrees, to have a central location where we have people that understand and can help educate and help get more people on board, because I think the initial confusion makes people resistant to it. And so the more that we can educate, the more community members we have on board, the more those people are talking to the city about how this is important, and the further we can get on that route to zero waste and climate smart action.
And I really agree with you too. If it was possible for an event to have a centralized setup where somebody could be watching and making sure that, you know, and educating at the same time, and not shaming, but, you know, obviously being kind and just letting people know where things go. I think that's going to be the easiest way to do things, and to make sure that, you know, one person, probably mainly the composter, isn't ending up having to, you know, take on extra work that they didn't quote people for, to have to be picking out a lot of trash. And I agree that I think that it could be helping to get the community on board. I mean, any specific instance like that where we can just do more education and normalize it within our community is just a really great thing. And gosh, I had something else to say, but it's not coming to my mind now. Yeah, that's it.
It looks like Robin fell off the call. Something happened with her internet, our host, but that's okay. So if anybody has questions, you can feel free to either unmute yourself and be a part, speak, or if it's easier to put something in the chat. we'll monitor the chat. I guess the only other thing I would say, just to kind of wrap up what we were talking about, is that in the end, the thing that was really, really exciting is that the vendors were all really proud of what they did. And I think at first, there wasn't 100% acceptance of what we wanted to do. There was a little resistance. It wasn't major resistance, but a little resistance because it's change, and change is hard for all of us, right? But quickly all of them adopted it, and it became something that they were really proud of. And at the end, you know, as Alissa said, it was our first year doing it, and it was very successful. And with all of our hiccups, it still was a really great thing. And we diverted so much trash from the market. I mean, the picture that we stated was one of the bigger markets that we had. And I think the biggest one, maybe we had 12 bags of garbage that was all compostable. But at our markets, I mean, we have to manage trash at those markets regardless. And it was much more disgusting trash. And it was terrible that we were putting all of that in the landfill. So that felt really, really good. And at the end of the market, I think everyone was really proud of that. So with that, are there any questions or comments?
Really quick, Robin also just wanted us to mention, I didn't do the full calculation. She said that they did the calculations and that you were able to divert 2 dump truck loads of what would have been plastic just back into the soil from being a zero waste market, which is pretty amazing.
Is anyone on this? Oh, go, Laura.
Yeah, I was going to say one question. I'm in the Hamilton area in the Bitterroot, and as far as I know, we don't have anything like a composting business in the valley, and that sounds like a pretty crucial ingredient. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, definitely. That said, I could be incorrect, but I believe it's 406 Recycling. I'm pretty sure they're based out of Hamilton, is starting to truck compostable waste to my friend Carl at Yes Compost in Bozeman. So it is happening, and there may not be a local location set up yet, but there are people that are transporting it to Bozeman.
What was the name again that you think might be here?
I'm pretty sure the business is called 406 Recycling. Okay. And they are essentially just a pickup company. So they're picking up recyclable materials and then dropping it to wherever they need to go to be recycled.
Okay. I think there is something in Missoula maybe, and that might be closer than Bozeman. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
406 is based out of Hamilton. I'm pretty sure the company that takes the compostable material is based out of Bozeman.
It looks like 406 Recycling is in Helena.
Dang it, it's Helena.
Oh, well.
A different H town.
Okay. No, but that's, maybe that means, I'm part of a climate action group, and maybe what we need to start first is getting a recycling business going in the valley. And that's the first step. Okay.
Yeah. I think, somebody like you or your organization that are wanting to become more zero waste could be the instigators for being like, okay, well, who can we empower and who can we help start say there's a demand for us in this material. We'll give you money to do it. So, to get somebody to get going and get started. And I know that people like me and Carl and Bozeman and Ryan over at Happy Trash Can in Bozeman would be happy to answer any questions and try and do what we can to help a composting facility start up in Hamilton.
Alissa, do you know about Missoula and what's the state of the composting business up there?
I think the last time that I heard, and maybe somebody else has some more information on it, but The city of Missoula took over Eco Compost, which was just, you know, like a yard waste composting facility. They weren't taking food waste, but as a city, they realized that they wanted to invest in food waste composting and infrastructure to make sure that they were doing it. And I think they're probably still in trials right now and figuring out how all that's going to work on a larger scale. But I know there's Soil Cycle, which is a woman-owned company that I think is doing food scrap, residential food scrap pickup, and worm composting at their site. And there's also Missoula Compost Collection, a different company that is, I believe, collecting on a larger scale and delivering it to the facility in Missoula that's now taking it, which is the city, to be composted.
So Laura, those might be some other resources for your climate action group to look at, because obviously that would be closer. And, you know, maybe for now it's finding someone that'll transport it up to Missoula within your community if you want to move on it a little bit quicker. Just a thought on that. I'm wondering if that's
on the east side of the state at all. That's always the look I get.
Is there anybody on the east side of the state at all? It's so hard because Montana is such a gigantic state, you know, and I really don't know that many people personally that live on the east side of the state. So, you know, because the population's so much lower, I'm not sure, and so much more spread out, I'm not sure what the feasibility is of it and what the demand is like. But I know there's some really awesome people like you that are you on the east side that really want to see stuff like that happen.
And Billings is big enough. It seems like there ought to be a way, you know?
Yep. So. I'm surprised there's not something already starting in Billings, honestly. Yeah, I imagine if it will pop up here in the next year or two, I hope. Yeah.
And if it doesn't, we're going to have to make it happen. So there you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and Bozeman isn't too far, so maybe the Happy Trash Can folks, they actually were the ones that inspired us to do the zero waste market here. And as we understand, they do it at the Bozeman Farmers Market. Is that correct, Brenna?
Yeah, they do it at both Bozeman Farmers Markets and I believe the Livingston Farmers Market. So they go across the pass to Livingston. I'm Googling right now, Eastern Montana Compost Company. I don't know for sure, but you might want to look up Rocky Mountain Compost. It looks like they're in Billings, but I don't know if
as a matter of fact, I think we got some stuff from them for our community garden, and then we found another place called Good Earth Works or something like that, and they also add some kind of compost to their soil. So there is something happening. It's just not maybe on the scale that we all might like to see, but that doesn't mean it can't be improved. Yeah. And I'm involved with our farmers market in the small town where I work. And I just kind of think this is really inspirational that when we can have a farmer's market again, we can be thinking in this direction. And, you know, during this COVID time, it's a planning time. So we can kind of start thinking in the, you know, even if we took it in steps over the next couple of years, it would be an improvement over what we have now, you know? So thanks for inspiring me, you guys.
Thank you, Andrea. That's kind of how we thought of this too. You know, we really started really strongly, as I said, with just the food vendors. And we knew that everyone else at the market, anything that was a consumable at the market, that's where we started. So, so the food vendors made sense. But, you know, we had basically throughout the summer, we were talking to the bakeries and we said, okay, we're going to transition towards you all doing the same thing. Our biggest struggle, as I said earlier, is going to be the farmers who want to do it more than anything. They are, you know, working on demanding the product. It's just not quite there yet. or at least as far as I know, it's not there yet. We're hoping though that that's going to shift and they're ready to be on board as soon as possible. I'm wondering if anyone else on the call has any thoughts or any experience with this, or if anyone, you know, there's not a ton of us here. So if Jill or Hillary or Coulter want to tell us, you know, what they're thinking about this and you know, think ways that they might implement zero waste principles in what they're doing.
Yeah, this is Hillary. And so I'm with the Bitterroot Climate Action Group as well. And we actually, some of us have talked to the composting places up in Missoula. And I do think that we could work out trucking some compost up there. But my question is, we've got 2 farmers market in Hamilton, one small. And I think it would work really well and elegantly to do composting and zero waste at the small farmers market. But the bigger Saturday market, you know, I'm just wondering, you know, who or how do you have to get the authority to say this is what we're doing with our farmers market? Because at our large farmers market, we've got a whole variety of vendors and farmers, et cetera. And I think a lot of them would not have buy-in into this. Some would, some wouldn't. You know, did you run into that? And how did you assume the authority to say, this is what we're going to do, and if you're going to be part of the market, you have to do this?
That's a really great question, Hillary. So we spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I probably didn't say it well enough in our presentation. So, you know, one of the biggest thing to get on was our founder of the market. So we had started mentioning it to her like maybe 2 years ago. Just as an idea and something we'd like to do. And then we invited her to that event on plastic that was, they held at our local community college, Flathead Valley Community College. And that helped absolutely convince her. And our market committee is actually a pretty small group and which might be unique. I think, you know, farmers market boards can be pretty big. With lots of different kinds of vendors, farmers and craft vendors and whatnot. But, you know, we laid some groundwork to educate them for this future goal that we had. And then we were able, the other piece that was really important is we were able to say, and we'll help make sure that it happens, because it's extra work. And so we made sure as our organization, Farmhands, we do the bulk of the work to make that happen every week. And it includes setting up the market, covering all the garbage cans, putting everything where it should be, educating vendors, putting up signs, and then making sure that the trash collection areas, because Hillary, I know the Hamilton Farmers Market on Saturday. That is an awesome farmers market. I love it. And it's very spread out, but your food vendors are all, as I understand it, your food vendors are all in one similar location. I think they're all pretty close, aren't they?
No, they're not. They're spread out amongst the block and a half, the couple of blocks.
So I think maybe the model that we did might work where you have different stations set up. But, you know, I think it's doable, but you're right. You have to start getting people on board. So maybe you start, do you know if your farmer's market is a committee of folks? Is it a board? Do you know how it's organized?
There is a committee. There is a committee. And we do know some of the people on the committee.
So I would see I would try and get a champion on the committee. That would be my advice. So you find someone on that committee who likes the idea and, you know, you help them understand, like, you know, when we finish our toolkit, we'll send it to you. You give them the toolkit, you say, you know, it's happening in Bozeman, it's happening in Whitefish. And we're actually, I think, we're hopefully going to introduce it in Columbia Falls this next year. That's my hope. But, you know, so if you can get a champion on the committee, then that will help. And then, yeah, you just have it really simple. As far as the vendors go, you know, as we said, that didn't actually take a ton of effort. You might be surprised at the support that you will get from them, because what we found was that the products are actually pretty pretty easy to acquire. And that made a big difference. So I don't know if those ideas help, but those are the things I'd say. Brenna, would you have any other, or Alissa have any other thoughts on that?
One thing I'll say is that when we connected with Happy Trash Can in Bozeman, who had already this past year, I believe was their 3rd year of composting at farmers markets in Bozeman. Their suggestion to us was just that we require it. Like they had started their 1st year of like saying, if you want to, and that didn't really work because then there was trash and compostable things and things were getting mixed up. And so their recommendation to us was just straight up like, make it a requirement. Their experience was that when they made it a requirement, people did not back out of the farmers market because the cost difference was small enough that it wasn't a huge inhibitor, and the market as a whole supported their slight increase in what cost that they were selling. I'm willing to bet that a community like Bozeman or a community like Whitefish, where there's really heavy tourism and therefore like a big influx of money in the summer, might be a little different from smaller farmers markets where there's maybe less tourism and more of just the local community members. And so the increase in cost might be more noticeable and have more pushback. So that I can imagine that might be a difference. But we didn't have a single vendor back out, and Bozeman hasn't either. So I think like vendors might say a lot that they might say things that they don't actually mean when it comes down to it, I guess.
Well, and that's a good point too. Thanks, Brenna. On the vendor application, Hillary, we also, we had emailed all the vendors way ahead of the market to tell them that we were going to do this and it was going to be a requirement. And then when they signed up to be a vendor, it was very clear on their application, and they had to click a button that said, I understand that I must have, BPI certified compostable products on all food, on all products that are leaving my truck or whatever. So they agreed to abide by our the rules of the market, and every market has a lot of rules, so you always want to be careful with that. But that it wasn't a barrier, as Brenna said. So how about
I was
go,
just gonna
Alissa.
say, and maybe once you guys are done with that toolkit, I mean, it could be that's the whole point, is that it could be helpful to be able to take this toolkit, and present it to this committee that might say like, oh, that sounds like way too much work, or it sounds like it's not going to work, or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, here's the steps that this farmers market has gone through to make it happen, and it worked great for them. Yeah. And one little thing that I forgot to mention earlier, which may not matter, but the reason that we didn't want to keep trash cans, besides the obvious, we wanted it to be a zero waste event, but like, why wouldn't we just leave a trash can near the compost bin and just label it? Because we have done that in the past at the farmers market, where I brought my composting bin and set it next to the trash and was like, this is for compost and this is for trash. And as you might expect, a lot of compostable material that could have been composted was put into the trash can, and a lot of trash ended up in the compost bin. So, yeah.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Now that I'm back on. That was exciting. I just wanted to make, these are 2 points that I have, as an outsider watching the process, these are my takeaways, thinking about it from a community perspective. And yeah, and there's 3 of them. One is that the biggest variable is the customer. is the consumer. It's not the vendor or the organization. It's, so it's extraordinary the amount of effort and energy that goes into educating the consumer, and it's clearly going to take repetition, but as the consumer gets educated, that helps drive the effort that a community might want to make towards going zero waste. So we are the barrier, so that's a key thing. And so repetition and space for that education has to be available from a community in terms of saying, yes, we're willing to be teachable. And the second thing that comes out of it in my mind is because to me, it's a discrete project that had an incredibly positive outcome. All it took was education and a willingness on the part of everybody. And again, the consumer is the biggest variable. But the second piece of it is, so what I'm trying to say is that it's easy, it's easy to be successful, relatively speaking. And beyond that, it has an extraordinary value kind of going upstream in that the more communities are willing to do this, it will drive the technology behind truly compostable materials, because there are actually a number of places, as I understand it, from what I've heard from both the farmers and Gretchen and Alissa and other folks in the process, where the products that are being provided still don't quite meet, they don't quite meet the needs of the person using it. So for the farmers who are trying to be plastic free, the plastic bags that they use, the compostable plastic bags that they use, there are some limits to the technology, what's available to them. And the more that the consumers push that demand for technology, the better the technology will get. And that will only come from more and more people participating in zero waste. So there's so much value in leaning into this at any rate. It will also help drive this change in certification and regulations that create these, I think, unintended barriers, but nonetheless big barriers to a successful closed loop system, demonstrated in this example about organic certification and compostable and BPI certified compostable products. That's the left side not talking to the right side or whatever. It's a gap, and the more we demand it as participants, the easier it will be to shift and get coherency all around the cycle. So those are the things I wanted to point out from my end, looking at it from a community standpoint. I'm complete.
I guess the thing that I would add is that the fact that we did a zero waste market has other folks in town talking about similar issues. And I have kind of tried to champion Rhonda, or who's become really a spokesperson for the work that we're doing. And being a business owner in the community, she is just ready. She's sick of plastic. As I said earlier, she wants an initiative citywide, and who knows what we'll see, but doing these kinds of things, even on a small scale, can spark, something on quite a large scale. And so I wanted to say to Hillary and Laura, it sounds like you're both on the Bitterroot climate plan. And, I wonder if your organization could assist the market in doing it, because it is extra work, like that's clear. And so if a market feels busy, or they feel like they don't have the capacity to add something, the community has to, they have to support it. So I wanted to just see Jill or Coulter, if you had anything to add or any questions.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, first of all, can I get the resources you guys found the compostable materials at? We ran into an issue. I work part-time for my mother-in-law, who has a catering company, and we couldn't find good things to replace saran wrap with. So if you could shoot some of those my way, I'll put my email in the chat box. That would be super. Oh, I'll just email you.
Great.
Perfect. That'll be better. Next question I had was about the sort of like the bubble effect of something like this, because the farmers market, in my experience, has always been a bit of kind of an eco or a microcosm of its own, where you have, almost exclusively local foods. There's a much higher percentage of sustainable or organic or whatever than your regular run-of-the-mill grocery store. And you tend to get people who are there more for the farmers market experience than, say, rushing through, trying to grab their stuff and get out the door like you do at a regular grocery store. So you've already got kind of a microcosm of people who are probably much more receptive to this type of change. My question is that I know that it's a really good starting off point, but as was mentioned by Alissa, there are some things that come in that didn't start in your microcosm that you have to deal with, like babies' diapers. You can't do anything about that. And I think that, having a plan for that and having the one itsy bitsy tiny trash can is much more realistic to what is possible. And I think it sends a better message, as opposed to, it sort of almost becomes a NIMBY, like not in my backyard. Like, we're zero waste right here, but 10 feet over there, that's not, I don't have a camera, so you can't see all my fun hand motions. Anyways, 10 feet over there is totally waste centric. I know the messaging of almost zero waste just doesn't have the same ring as zero waste, but I think it's a more, ethical and responsible message to carry. Coming from us, we're starting a homestead in the Livingston area, and I would love to take the zero waste concept to the Livingston Farmers Market. I don't know if there's zero waste or not yet. I don't think so. But as was mentioned multiple times, there's composting facilities in Bozeman, so that wouldn't be an issue. But I always struggle with, we're going to set up our little homestead, and it's going to be this perfect little bubble, and we're going to do everything right. But we're going to bring in a bunch of inputs from somewhere else, and we're going to make a huge ecological disaster over there. But that's not on my area. That's not in my zero waste farmers market, right? So that's kind of some of the stuff that I know that's not a coherent question, sorry. But it's just something that's sort of rattling around in my head, is trying to balance out, the nice slogan of zero waste with what is the most actually ecologically responsible action to take. And I do think that setting the zero waste and doing it successfully sets a really great example. I'm super excited. And I do, like I said, I'm going to take, hopefully, if I can get you guys' materials when we get into the Livingston Farmers Market, I'm going to take it and try to convince them to go in that direction. It's just something that I wonder what your guys' thoughts are about that sort of kind of bubble effect.
No, thanks, Coulter. I think because we weren't able to do a centralized waste station, that we struggled with how to do the trash, just as you said. And Alyssa's suggestion, which is, we haven't debriefed that, but I like it. I think that's probably the right thing if you're going to decentralize how you have your trash stations. Because we were just we couldn't think about how, for some reason, we had a block maybe, how to do that. So I think that suggestion's great. I think the other model where you have a centralized area that people come to, then it becomes really easy to do something like that. And you're right, like it has to be addressed. It's probably like the mistake we made and that we didn't fix that year. And we will definitely address that in year 2. And I think you're right. So.
One thing I'd like to say about like the microcosm of the farmers market is that I mentioned this earlier, but having an event that is very central to our town, happens every single Tuesday for the entire summer, which is our biggest tourist season, and is something that draws not only all of our community members, but community members from a few of our surrounding towns, and the vast, I would think, a pretty good majority of our tourists, means that we get to, by having this zero waste event, we get to push the city to change their views on those things. Individual restaurants and grocery stores and things like that, composting with Alissa is of course fantastic, and those people running those businesses become advocates, but having an event where not just business leaders, but just the average community member is getting educated and becoming invested in, and hopefully becoming an advocate for zero waste, forces, no matter what, it kind of forces the city to start thinking in that direction. So I think when we think about those little microcosms or those little societies where they might be more comfortable with compost, it helps bring in the surrounding society to get excited, to even just be thinking about it. So I think that's why we really have been pushing like the zero waste wording, because it gets other people to start thinking about it.
Yeah, and there's a huge value in that sort of getting people's minds going in the direction, especially when you're dealing with, you know, consumers. You're probably exposing people who've never been around this stuff to it. You know, like if Walmart went zero waste for a day, they would hit a jillion people who'd never even thought of the concept. You know, they would have to understand what that word means. So I totally agree with that. I was just saying, as far as, you know, implementation goes, how best to deal with those things, because, you know, just telling people to walk off site sort of degrades the actual integrity of the event, in my opinion. Again, I wish I had a video. You could see my crazy arm movements.
No, we agree with you, and that's something we need to, you know, figure out. Because obviously there is waste. I mean, we had waste at the market, so.
I was going to say, well, in my mind, like zero waste doesn't mean that there's not waste disposed of within our market. It's that the market's not creating waste. And there's a big difference there. So like maybe, you know, whatever business down the street is creating waste and they brought it in, but it wasn't, you know, the Whitefish Farmers Market that by hosting it, it was creating a ton of waste that had to be disposed of in the landfill.
Right. And I had one more question specifically for Alissa. You were saying that when you compost these compostable containers and the food scraps and all this stuff that you're composting, you can't go certified organic, which that's fine. I'm going to be too diverse and too small to go certified organic anyway, so I'm not getting certified. But have you used this compost for multiple seasons with these compostable containers in it? And has there been any noticeable buildup in the soil of anything, or has there been, you know, noticeably any, like, I'm trying to find a word that doesn't mean bad, but just a noticeable effects on the crops from these types of things? Like, you know, it makes your tomatoes sad if you use it too many times, or you got to mix it kind of a lot with topsoil or anything like that. Just kind of as a understanding for, is there any other effects to this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, not that I've seen. And that granted that because of COVID and because of so many restaurants shutting down or having to do to-goes, there's been a massive increase in to-go containers that are being disposed of at my site. But that said, again, like if that container is BPI certified, there's no toxicity left over from that composting process. I used compost, and I know that we got great reviews from the compost used after having, you know, certified compostable containers in there. And just out of my own curiosity, I'm going to test my compost next year for any. I mean, I've tested for heavy metals and stuff in the past, and it was never an issue. But I'm curious, and we'll retest again and just be more stringent about making sure that all the stuff that I take is BPI certified, because that's really the only thing out there that makes sure that I'm not putting toxic material back onto the land, because that's absolutely not what I want to do. So no, I haven't noticed anything.
Okay, no, I'm not trying to say you're doing anything. I'm just curious, when you've got there's a lot of greenwashing out there, as you've mentioned, and you've got product coming from far away. They're not manufactured by someone that we have a hand on. There's, just been stories of strange things happening. So I was just curious if you're the person putting your hands on it, how you've seen it.
Yeah, no, I totally didn't feel like I was being attacked by any means or like anything like that. I think it's a great question. I think that we need to be talking about that as a community and asking and looking at it. And for me, the composter to be double checking and checking that kind of thing out. And that's why the BPI certification is so important, because that's the only certification body out there to even check on something like this. Because I guarantee you that there's quote unquote compostable containers out there that aren't good to be putting in compost and aren't good to be putting on the soil. So because this is such like an explosive time for compostable containers, there's going to be a lot of people that are trying to make money in that sphere and say that they're compostable or they're natural or whatever other word can be used in the greenwashing process that makes the unassuming consumer think that it's okay. And yeah, that's why I would push for the BPI certification or the compostable certified label, not just say like it's biodegradable, because that really means nothing.
Right. Thank you.
I guess before we wrap up, I just wanted to see if Jill had anything she wanted to ask. Since I can't see you, Jill, I don't know. And if you don't, that's totally fine. But I wanted to give you an opportunity in case you did.
Thanks for asking. I really just sat on because I'm new to the Climate Smart board. And when Robin suggested that these talks were going to take place, I thought I would behoove myself to learn some stuff. So it's been very, very informative. I thank you very much.
Thanks for being on, Jill. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for what you've done. It's amazing.
Thank
Good
you.
job.
We need your advocacy though with the city too, okay?
I'll be there.
Well, I think we're almost out of time. So unless anybody else had any questions before we go.
Would it be possible to circulate among people who've been here, at least those of you who presented, contact info if we did think up more questions in the future? Just emails?
Yeah, I put my email in the chat. I can do it again down here. And if anybody wants to get more information, feel free to email me. And as I said, we're working on our toolkit. So if you email me, I'll happily send it to you when it's finished. Right now and I could send it to you in its halfway mode too, if you wanted. But yeah, absolutely. Any other questions before we go? Well, thank you all for joining us.
Great.
Ooh,
I just want to say thank you so much. It was super great. I really loved it.
Oh, good. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all of you for participating. It was great to have you all interject in some way. And we wish you luck on your efforts to do something in your own communities. And as we said, we've kind of used this as a case study. So if you need us to even talk to your group, we'd be happy to do that. So thanks for your time and hope you guys all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Alissa. Thank you, Gretchen. And thank you, everybody, for
Great.
attending.
Yeah.